The Chinese government just wrapped up a ceremony here in Beijing celebrating the eradication of extreme poverty after a lengthy campaign. Chinese president handed out tokens of recognition to role models and groups in the nation's battle against poverty. About 770 million impoverished rural residents in China have shaken off poverty since the launch of reform and opening up in the late 1970s. That contributed more than 70% of global poverty eradication efforts. This is also a big step forward toward completing the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. Earlier, I had the chance to sit down with the new UN resident coordinator in China, Siddharth Chatterjee. As we sit down there for an exclusive interview, he said the world today needs to regain momentum in achieving the UN SDGs. And China's path to poverty eradication offers insight that the world can learn and at least to know more about. Let's listen in. Sid, what a pleasure to see you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Happy Lunar New Year to you.
Happy Lunar New Year. It's an honor. It's my first Lunar New Year ever in China. It's my first time in China, and what a celebration it has been.
I know you were celebrating, but I know you were also quite busy meeting with people, yes. Having a lot of great meetings. Yes. Tell me more about them. Are they successful?
First of all, I think for me, China is a revelation. It is a revelation of what a country can achieve in such a short time when there is a strong political determination to make it happen. So when you read about a country that has lifted 890 million people out of poverty in just a matter from 1980 to now, one has to understand the size and scope and witness it to understand what it really means. And I feel what China has achieved in the multifaceted way, its influence in the multilateral space. The environment of Beijing, I went for a run here, and it feels like as if I'm running in a clean air environment. I look at my phone and I see the temperature, and if it's -3 and the AQI levels are at about 20%, I said I'm good to go. I went for my run over here. So it's just fascinating. But I arrived here on the 6th of February of 2021 after my quarantine. And each day has been quite spectacular. First of all, meeting with my own team, getting to know my colleagues within the UN family, meeting with, I was honored that the government of China gave me my credentials quite quickly so I could get to work. So I've been meeting some of the ambassadors, and I'm meeting with the president of the Asia Investment Infrastructure Bank, President Jen. And it was amazing to see the scope of multilateralism that I'm seeing within the institutions inside Beijing.
It's amazing, isn't it? A lot of things are happening and changing as we speak.
Yes.
What do you think will be your role here? Your role, first of all, is relatively new. Only your predecessor began to have the title of the so-called resident coordinator, but that's the new role that the UN has designed for anyone that's responsible for coordinating a country's operation of the UN. So tell me about your role, particularly at this critical time and uncertain time and unpredictable time.
So, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres, when he came in as the Secretary General in 2017, he came in with a very clear determination and purpose. He wanted 3 things to happen. Number 1, a reformed UN. Number 2, a UN which is fit for purpose. Number 3, a UN that delivers as one. So in 2019, for example, in Kenya, I was the UNDP resident representative and the UN resident coordinator. He says, no, it's not going to work effectively. You need to have a resident coordinator who's de-linked from the entire UN system and basically has a coordination and an oversight role. And therefore, there is what you would term as mutual accountability that I have with every head of agency, fund, and program. The vision of the Secretary General is a UN that is able to deliver in lockstep with the priorities of the government. That is what the UN is meant to be. It's a member states organization. I have a 3,500 word essay, and that 3,500 word essay will be both in English and in Chinese, and it's essentially laying out my vision.
So what is your vision?
The vision is, how does the UN deliver as one in terms of the priorities that the country has? There are areas that we could work on together, achieving universal health coverage, on the environment, on, let's say, access to fresh water. And the gaps where the government feels, okay, here are the gaps in the country in terms of our development trajectory as we are marching towards Agenda 2030 or the Sustainable Development Goals. The President of China, President Xi Jinping, is very clear. He wants China to be a model of the SDGs. I hope you heard his speech in Davos. It was spectacular. In fact, it was poetry and philosophy with profound statements that came out. He talked about the COVID. He said, it's just like after a winter comes a spring, and out of darkness comes a morning. This will also pass, but what it should leave behind is resilience. We need a global, robust health system. Any country which is lagging behind in its health system makes the whole world vulnerable. And I think here is an opportunity that I hope to work the entire UN family with the government of China to improve SDG 3. SDG 3, or universal health coverage, is going to be the anchor to the success of all the remaining goals. It is clear.
It's very interesting you talk about healthcare and health, because the top priority now is the pandemic. At the just concluded conference, including the involvement of the UN Secretary General about the vaccines, we have seen more than 100 countries in the world have never received even one dose of vaccines, yet the richest top 10 countries in the world are having most of the vaccines. Now, when you talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, that is grand, but when it comes to life, it is very specific. So, Sid, I really have to be frank here. How is the UN gonna testify in front of the world that it still serves its purpose, which is bring equal access to as many people as possible? I know you're in China, but your role is also about that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is why you need political will. This is why the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, this is why the head of WHO, Dr. Tedros, this is why President Xi Jinping have been outspoken about the global common on immunization. I think when your president said that vaccines are a global public goal, it was a profound statement. It was a message throughout the world. And I think we all need to converge on health. This is where the new multilateralism is going to be, of ensuring that we make everybody health. Anybody left behind makes the world vulnerable. So I feel that the role of the UN has actually become strengthened, that China is actually helping to strengthen that role. After all, we are a committee of nations. We are represented by member states, and it's up to member states on where it wants to see the UN. I think the timing of my arrival here, the issues that are emerging in the world, the fact that we only have 9 years to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, this is the time where our Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed says, you have to flip the orthodoxy. You can't do business as usual. I feel with the Chinese government, with the UN country team, with the member states, we could actually be advancing the health, the agriculture, the education, the water, the climate, all these agendas simultaneously, because the whole world is interdependent. There is no decoupling. Economics cannot be decoupled. People cannot be decoupled. They will continue to travel and interface with each other. The opportunity that China is showing to the rest of the world as a country which has come from scratch. I mean, look, in the 1960s, let's look at the per capita GDP. The US's per capita GDP was at about 26.7%. China's per capita GDP was at about 2.3 or 3%. Today, look at where China is standing as a global economic giant. But what China has shown, that it's possible. And I see there are 3 P's that are important. Number 1 is political will. Without political will at a nation state level, at the leadership level of the UN, at any level, it's not going to happen. Now we are already seeing multiple layers of political will, whether it's the European Union, President Biden has been very clear about the climate, The Secretary General is repeating and bringing global leaders together. We've heard your president in Davos, which I thought was a spectacular and quite a moving speech for many of us who watched it end to end. The second is public policy, the second P. Now, public policy shapes what governments can do, and this is again a place where the UN has an important role, regardless of which country it is in, to work with governments to shape the public policy that impacts the furthest behind.
But, you know, people here, the government very committed. Also, I think a lot of Chinese you have met over the past week or so, they must be telling you that they want to contribute to the world, and they are. If you look at the vaccine, I'm just using that example, Sid. China has been donating 10 million doses of vaccines to COVAX, has been helping provide vaccine aids to 53 developing countries as they were asking for help, and has been exporting right now to 22 countries around the world. But people here might also want to know, what are the other countries doing? What are the developed countries doing? I mean, you as the representative of the United Nations here in China, people might just approach you from the street and say, so what about the other members of the UN? Are they also trying to do what we believe is correct? What the UN believes is correct, Sid?
So, Wei, on this, the Secretary General, Dr. Tedros, have been outspoken. This is a human rights issue. It is about making sure that nobody is left behind. It is like, you know, we are talking about, the reality is we are all in this together and we will come out of this together. There is no one, if you leave one country, one community, one village behind who has not been immunized or not vaccinated, the potential of that vaccine coming and hitting back again, as we are already seeing the variants that are coming out from certain parts of the world. Yeah. And this is where the unison. But there is a third P to this, and that's the partnerships. And this calls for a new type of partnership. It is about the UN, the private sector, governments all coming together. I'm actually looking at COVID as becoming the renaissance of multilateralism.
I like that analogy. You know, I hope you're right.
It is the renaissance of multilateralism. I mean, I feel that today where we are, the fact that, look at the speed with which a vaccine has come out. Who could have thought about it? I mean, technical wisdom. I had polio as a child. And the fact is, I missed a vaccine and the vaccines were still evolving that time. But I was lucky that it was caught at the right time. But today, the same vaccine has eradicated polio in China, in India, in most of the world. But those vaccines are not automatic. They take years to build. The fact that, look at what science has done. China, Russia, US, UK, their scientists having come together, developed vaccines which was inconceivable. But look at the advances mankind has made in science, in technology, in innovation. However, having said that, we find out now that actually influenza rates across the world has dropped. What COVID has taught us is that we need to wash our hands, we need to wear a mask, we need to maintain some space. It has led to a reduction of influenza. I was in Kenya, and I want your audience to know this. In the early part of March, we realized that COVID will come to us in Kenya. And we started to work with the government. So the government instituted very robust policies in place of isolation, of quarantine, of travelers coming in, etc. Huge amount of social media messaging. I put about 150 UN staff from agencies, funds and programs to support the government of Kenya. We redeployed about $45 million US from our existing UN Development Assistance Framework to respond to the public health crisis. You know what happened? We suddenly found that we could not get gloves, PPEs, masks. It was unavailable. End of March, a plane arrives. An Ethiopian Airways plane arrives. And China sends through for countries in Africa a huge supplies of PPEs and all that, and that proved to be the determining factor of how many African states responded. Today, Kenya is actually shown as a poster child of success in terms of managing the COVID outbreak. It was recently featured in the Independent. So I want to take this opportunity to also thank the Chinese government for that early response, without which we probably would have had a different report card. So it is showing that when nation states can come together and look at health, the environment, as a common existentialist crisis, can then the UN be better at its work? Will member states have improved outcomes? But ultimately, it is about the prosperity of all and leaving no one behind. And this is how we will prosper.
I know you are a very optimistic person. You're also having a great can-do spirit. I know, Sid, because I've been hearing a lot of stories before I talk to you. But you're also facing another challenge, because you're the guy between the United Nations members of the UN and China. So now there seems to be an interesting period of development in the world politics about China, about China's relations with the rest of the world. How would you be able to keep that balance well, particularly within a UN bureaucracy, particularly when you are communicating with other of your colleagues from different organizations of the UN and the member countries?
So, first of all, I have to say that for me, it's a singular honor that the Secretary General chose me to come to China. It's a singular honor that the Chinese government accepted my candidature. So that is the starting point. I've spent over 24 years in the UN system. I've worked in war-torn countries like Somalia and Iraq and South Sudan, and many of these places. When I come to China, I'm inspired. The day I landed here, the day I landed in Guangzhou, because I read about Guangzhou's history. It used to be a very poor place,
So you were doing your quarantine in Guangzhou.
So, I come to Guangzhou and I'm thinking I'm actually coming to some remote part of China. And then suddenly I realized that I've actually walked into a place which is economically buoyant with the infrastructure and bustling. But how within 1 or 2 generations, life has changed. And this is precisely the kind of change we need to demonstrate to the rest of the world. That you could actually be a part of the third world and progress out of that. Many countries, I was honored to serve in Kenya. And I've seen how Kenya has pulled people out of poverty, has advanced as a nation state. But today, more than ever, the world needs to come together to fight common threats, pandemics, environment, all the other crises. The issue is, today it's the survival and the thrival and the prosperity of humanity. It is not about individual nation states, but people need to be inspired. I, as the resident coordinator, intend to tell the China story to everybody in the world.